It was a profound personal commitment which defined her whole life. She made sacrifices for duty.
Camilla thought the truth would stay buried, but secrets have a way of walking back into the light. "This cannot come out," she once said, believing everything was safe. But King Charles finds himself standing between loyalty and shock as he learns what she did to Catherine behind his back. The silence in the palace turns heavy, emotions grow fierce, and the weight of betrayal fills the air. This is not just royal drama, this is personal, painful, and powerful. Now Charles must face reality, and once he knows the truth, nothing in the royal family will remain the same. The discovery. King Charles III sat in his private study at Clarence House on a cold December afternoon, the kind of gray winter day that made London feel older than its ancient stones. He was a man who carried the weight of 1,000 years of history on his shoulders, yet tried to remain gentle and approachable despite the crown that now rested upon his head. Those who knew him well understood that beneath the formal exterior lived a deeply sensitive soul, someone who cared profoundly about his family and felt the pain of discord more acutely than most. The envelope arrived without ceremony, slipped among the usual correspondence that filled his days with matters of state and protocol. It bore no return address, just his name written in elegant script that seemed vaguely familiar. Something about it made him pause, made him set aside the other papers and break the seal with fingers that trembled slightly, though he could not say why. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written in a hand he recognized immediately. It was from someone within the palace staff, someone who had served the family for over 2 decades and whose loyalty had never been questioned. The words began simply enough: an apology for the breach of protocol, an acknowledgement that what was about to be revealed could cost them their position, perhaps even their livelihood. But conscience, the writer explained, demanded that the truth finally be told. What Charles read in the pages that followed would change everything he thought he understood about his marriage and his family. The letter detailed a pattern of behavior that had been hidden from him with careful calculation, a series of incidents involving his wife Camilla and his daughter-in-law Catherine that painted a picture so disturbing he had to stop reading several times to collect himself. According to the account, it had started almost from the moment William announced his engagement to Catherine back in 2010. Camilla, who had fought so hard for her own acceptance into the royal family, had viewed the arrival of this young, beautiful, and instantly beloved newcomer as a threat, not to her position, perhaps, but to something deeper, something more personal. Catherine represented everything Camilla had never been, could never be: young, naturally elegant, adored by the public from the very first moment she stepped into the spotlight. The letter described how Camilla had begun with small cruelties, comments made when Charles was not present, suggestions that Catherine was not quite suitable, not quite understanding of royal ways. She would correct Catherine's choices in fashion, in protocol, in the way she held herself at public events, always with a smile that did not reach her eyes, always with words that seemed helpful on the surface but carried barbs beneath. Charles felt his chest tighten as he read. He thought of Catherine, sweet Catherine, who had always been nothing but gracious and kind, who had worked so hard to earn her place in the family, who had given him 3 beautiful grandchildren and stood by William through everything. Catherine, who never complained, who always smiled, who carried herself with a dignity that reminded him painfully of his first wife, Diana. The letter went on to describe incidents at family gatherings, holidays at Sandringham and Balmoral where Camilla would arrange seating to isolate Catherine, would make plans that deliberately excluded her, would tell stories about the old days, about Diana, in ways designed to make Catherine feel like an outsider looking in. The writer had witnessed Camilla whispering to other family members, spreading doubts about Catherine's capabilities as a mother, as a royal, as a suitable partner for the future king. But it was what came next that truly shook Charles to his core. During Catherine's recent health crisis, when she had been diagnosed with cancer and mandated treatment, Camilla had not shown the support that Charles had believed she had. The letter revealed that while Camilla appeared sympathetic in public and in front of Charles, behind closed doors she had been dismissive of Catherine's condition, had suggested to staff that Catherine was exaggerating her symptoms for attention, had even implied that the Princess of Wales was using her illness to gain sympathy and overshadow Camilla's own royal duties. Charles set the letter down, his hands shaking now with something more than tremor. He felt betrayed, not just for Catherine but for himself. How could the woman he had loved for so many years, the woman he had finally been able to marry after decades of waiting, how could she harbor such cruelty in her heart? How could she smile at family dinners while plotting to undermine and hurt someone who had done nothing to deserve such treatment? He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the London streets below where people went about their ordinary lives, unaware of the drama unfolding in the palaces above them. Charles was a man who valued harmony above almost everything else, who had spent his life trying to heal rifts and bring people together. The thought that his own wife had been creating discord, had been the cause of pain for someone he cared about deeply, was almost more than he could bear. The letter concluded with specific incidents, dates, and times, all meticulously recorded. The writer apologized again for the breach of trust, but explained that they could no longer stand by and watch Catherine suffer in silence, could no longer be complicit in Camilla's campaign of subtle cruelty. They asked for nothing in return, expected no reward, and would accept whatever consequences came from speaking the truth. Charles returned to his desk and read the letter again, then a third time, looking for any hint of exaggeration or malice, any reason to dismiss what he was reading as gossip or misunderstanding. But the details were too specific, too consistent with small things he had noticed over the years but dismissed or explained away. Moments when Catherine seemed to withdraw at family events, times when she and Camilla would exchange looks that he had not understood, occasions when William seemed protective of his wife in ways that now made terrible sense. The king sat in his study as the afternoon light faded, holding a letter that exposed a truth he had not wanted to see. And he knew that what came next would test not just his marriage, but his ability to lead his family through yet another crisis that threatened to tear them apart from within. The pattern of cruelty. To understand what Camilla had done mandated looking back across the years, tracing a pattern that had been there all along for anyone willing to see it. It was never obvious enough to cause scandal, never dramatic enough to demand immediate response. That was the terrible cleverness of it. Camilla had learned from her own difficult journey into the royal family how to navigate the treacherous waters of public opinion and private politics. And she had used that knowledge not to help Catherine, but to hurt her. In the beginning, during those early years after William and Catherine married in 2011, Camilla had seemed welcoming enough on the surface. She smiled in photographs, stood beside Catherine at official events, and played the role of supportive family member when cameras were watching. But the letter Charles had received detailed what happened when the cameras turned away. The writer of the letter had been present at a private tea at Clarence's house in 2012, shortly after Catherine's first pregnancy was announced. The young princess had been suffering from severe morning sickness, so debilitating that she had been hospitalized. While Charles fussed over Catherine with genuine concern, Camilla had remarked to another guest, just loud enough to be heard, that in her day women did not make such a fuss over the natural processes of pregnancy. The implication was clear. Catherine was weak, too delicate, not made of the same stern stuff as previous royal wives. As Catherine grew into her role and became more confident, more beloved by the public, Camilla's subtle attacks intensified. She would schedule her own engagements to overshadow Catherine's, would brief friendly journalists to ensure her own charitable work received more prominent coverage. When Catherine launched initiatives for children's mental health, Camilla would coincidentally announce similar programs, then later suggest to family members that Catherine had copied her ideas. At Christmas gatherings at Sandringham, Camilla would arrange activities and schedules that made it difficult for Catherine to participate fully. She would plan traditional shoots and country pursuits that she knew Catherine was less comfortable with, then make gentle comments about how Diana had been such a natural at country life. how she had fit in so effortlessly. The comparisons were designed to wound, to make Catherine feel that she could never measure up to the ghost of William's mother. The letter described an incident at Balmoral in the summer of 2015. Catherine had brought the children, George and Charlotte, then just toddlers, for their first extended stay at the Scottish estate. Charles had been delighted to have his grandchildren there, to share with them the place he loved so much. But Camilla had made the visit difficult at every turn. She complained about the noise children made, suggested that the nursery arrangements were not quite proper, criticized the nannies Catherine had brought along. When Catherine tried to establish routines for the children, tried to maintain some normalcy in their schedules, Camilla would undermine her with Charles, suggesting that the princess was being too rigid, too controlling, that she was not allowing the children to enjoy the freedom of the estate. Yet when the children grew tired or fussy, Camilla would raise her eyebrows at Catherine as if to say that she could not manage her own offspring properly. The cruelty extended to matters of protocol and royal duty. Camilla had decades of experience navigating the complex rules and traditions of royal life, and she used that knowledge as a weapon. She would give Catherine incorrect advice, then watch as the younger woman made mistakes that would be noticed by the press or commented upon by courtiers. When Catherine sought guidance on proper procedures, Camilla would provide information that was outdated or simply wrong, setting her up for small failures and embarrassments. There were the carefully orchestrated photo opportunities where Camilla would position herself prominently, leaving Catherine in less visible positions. There were the conversations with photographers and media representatives where Camilla would ensure that certain images were distributed more widely, that certain stories received more attention. She understood the power of media and image in shaping public perception, and she used it to elevate herself while subtly diminishing Catherine. The writer of the letter had witnessed Camilla's reaction when Catherine appeared on the cover of Vogue magazine, looking radiant and modern and every inch a future queen. Camilla had been furious in private, though she maintained her composure in public. She had immediately arranged her own high-profile media appearances, had granted interviews that positioned her as the wise elder stateswoman of the family, the one who truly understood royal duty and tradition. But perhaps the most painful aspect of Camilla's pattern of cruelty was how she manipulated Charles himself. She knew her husband's weaknesses, knew his desire for family harmony, knew his tendency to avoid conflict. She would present situations in ways that made Catherine appear difficult or demanding, would frame disagreements as Catherine's unwillingness to compromise or understand. She poisoned Charles's perception of his daughter-in-law slowly, drop by drop, never enough to cause open conflict, but enough to create distance and doubt. The letter detailed conversations where Camilla had suggested to Charles that Catherine was too ambitious, too focused on her public image, too concerned with popularity rather than duty. She implied that Catherine was calculating, that her famous warmth and accessibility were merely performance, that she was not as genuinely caring as she appeared. These comments were always made casually, in passing, as observations rather than accusations, but they had their effect. When Catherine suffered a miscarriage between Charlotte and Louis, a private tragedy that the family kept from the public, Camilla showed little sympathy. The letter described how she had suggested to staff that perhaps it was for the best, that 3 children were quite enough for a modern royal couple, that Catherine should focus on the children she had rather than constantly trying to expand the family. The coldness of such remarks at such a vulnerable time spoke to a hardness in Camilla's character that Charles had never seen or had chosen not to see. Through it all, Catherine remained gracious, remained dignified, remained silent about the treatment she endured. She did not complain to William, did not seek allies within the family, did not wage her own campaign of whispers and manipulation. She simply continued to do her duty, to raise her children, to support her husband, to serve the crown with every ounce of dedication she possessed, and her very grace, her refusal to descend to Camilla's level, seemed to make the queen consort's animosity burn even hotter. Catherine's silent suffering. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had learned early in her relationship with William that silence was sometimes the greatest strength. She was a woman of remarkable grace and resilience, someone who carried herself with quiet dignity even when the world around her grew chaotic. Those who knew her best understood that beneath her polished exterior lived a deeply feeling person, someone who cared intensely about her family and her duty, but who had learned to keep her deepest hurts private, hidden away where they could not become ammunition for those who wished her ill. The first time Camilla made a cutting remark about her background, Catherine had been too shocked to respond. It was at a private family dinner in 2011, just months after the wedding. Camilla had been discussing bloodlines and heritage, had made what seemed like an innocent comment about how important it was to understand one's place in the grand tapestry of British aristocracy. Then she had turned to Catherine with a smile that did not reach her eyes and said how fortunate it was that William had such a strong sense of his own lineage, so that he could guide those who might not have the same natural understanding. Catherine had felt the sting but said nothing. She had smiled politely, had changed the subject, had tucked the hurt away. She told herself that Camilla was simply awkward, that she did not mean to be unkind, that it was better to overlook small slights in the interest of family harmony. William had been across the room, deep in conversation with his father, and had not heard. Catherine did not tell him later. What would be the point? It would only create tension, only make things harder for everyone. But the comments continued. At a garden party at Clarence's house, Camilla had remarked to several guests, while Catherine stood nearby, about how refreshing it was that the younger generation was so comfortable with informality, though of course there was something to be said for traditional standards of royal behavior. The implication was clear to everyone present. Catherine was too casual, too modern, not quite suitable by the old standards that Camilla claimed to represent. When Catherine became pregnant with George, the joy of impending motherhood was shadowed by Camilla's constant undermining. The Queen Consort would offer advice that contradicted what Catherine's doctors recommended, would suggest that modern mothers were too reliant on medical intervention, that in her day, women simply got on with things without all the fuss and monitoring. When Catherine suffered from severe hyperemesis gravidarum, a condition that left her desperately ill and hospitalized, Camilla's sympathy seemed performative at best. The writer of the letter had witnessed Catherine in tears in a private bathroom at Buckingham Palace during a state dinner in 2013. The young mother, still adjusting to the demands of royal life with a newborn baby, had been struggling to balance her duties with her desperate need to be with her son. Camilla had made pointed comments throughout the evening about how royal mothers of previous generations had managed to fulfill their obligations without constantly running back to the nursery, how they had understood that duty came before personal desires. Catherine had held herself together through dinner, through the speeches and the toasts, through the endless handshakes and polite conversations, but afterwards, alone for just a moment, she had allowed herself to break down. When the staff member found her, Catherine had apologized for her weakness, had wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders, and returned to the reception as if nothing had happened. She never mentioned it to William, never complained, never asked for help or sympathy. The pattern continued through the births of Charlotte and Louis, through the years of public service and private struggle. Catherine threw herself into her work, into her charitable causes, into being the best mother and wife and princess she could possibly be. She worked with children's charities, championed mental health initiatives, became a patron of numerous organizations. She was brilliant at her role, natural and warm and genuinely caring. The public loved her, and that love seemed to make Camilla's hostility grow even stronger. At family gatherings, Catherine learned to anticipate Camilla's small cruelties. She knew that seating arrangements would place her far from William, that activities would be planned around Camilla's preferences rather than hers, that her opinions would be dismissed or ignored while others were solicited and valued. She learned to smile through it all, to never let anyone see how much it hurt to be made to feel like an outsider in what was supposed to be her own family. The comparisons to Diana were particularly painful. Camilla would make them casually, always framing them as compliments to the late princess, but the subtext was always the same. Catherine could never measure up, could never be what Diana had been. When Catherine wore certain styles or supported certain causes, Camilla would mention how Diana had done it first, had done it better, had brought such natural grace to everything she touched. The irony was not lost on Catherine that Camilla, who had been blamed for so much of Diana's unhappiness, now used her memory as a weapon. Through it all, Catherine kept silent because she understood something fundamental about her position. She was not just William's wife. She was the future queen consort, the mother of the future king. Everything she did, everything she said, would be scrutinized and judged and used either for or against the monarchy. If she complained about Camilla, if she created family drama, if she allowed the conflict to become public, it would damage the institution she had sworn to serve. So she suffered in silence, believing that her pain was a price worth paying for the greater good. William sensed that something was wrong, of course. He knew his wife too well not to notice the moments when she withdrew, when her smile became forced, when she seemed to carry a weight she would not share. He asked her about it gently, repeatedly, but Catherine always deflected. She would tell him she was tired, or worried about the children, or simply overwhelmed by the demands of their schedule. She would not tell him about his stepmother's cruelty, because she knew it would force him into an impossible position, caught between loyalty to his father and protection of his wife. The loneliness of Catherine's situation was profound. She could not confide in her own family without burdening them with problems they could not solve. She could not speak to other members of the royal family without risking that her words would get back to Camilla or Charles. She could not even fully trust all of her staff, knowing that some had divided loyalties, that the palace was full of people who owed their positions to Camilla's patronage. So Catherine endured. She endured the snide comments and the deliberate exclusions. She endured the undermining of her parenting and the dismissal of her ideas. She endured being made to feel inadequate and unwelcome in what was supposed to be her home. She endured it all with grace and dignity, never letting the public see, never giving Camilla the satisfaction of knowing how deeply her arrows had struck. But the cost of that silence was high. Catherine developed anxiety that she hid from everyone but her closest confidants. She had trouble sleeping, would lie awake at night replaying conversations and interactions, wondering what she could have done differently, how she could have better protected herself without causing family conflict. She lost weight, grew pale, but attributed it to the demands of her schedule, rather than the emotional toll of constant psychological warfare. When Catherine was diagnosed with cancer in early 2024, it felt in some ways like her body manifesting the stress she had carried for so long. The diagnosis was devastating, terrifying, a threat not just to her life, but to her ability to be there for her children, for William, for the causes she cared about so deeply. And even then, even facing something so serious, Camilla's lack of genuine compassion cut deeper than Catherine wanted to admit. The Princess of Wales faced her treatment with the same quiet courage she had shown in facing everything else. She did not complain, did not seek special treatment, did not ask for the world to stop while she fought her private battle. She focused on her children, on staying strong for them, on maintaining as much normalcy as possible in their lives. And she said nothing about how Camilla's dismissiveness during her illness added another layer of pain to an already agonizing experience. The breaking point. The incident that finally brought everything into the light happened on a December evening at Windsor Castle, during what was supposed to be a quiet family dinner celebrating the end of the year. It was December 15th, 2024, and the family had gathered for an intimate meal. Just Charles and Camilla, William and Catherine, and a few senior staff members who were considered part of the inner circle. Catherine had been feeling stronger after her treatment, had been slowly returning to public duties, and the evening was meant to be a celebration of her recovery and a chance for the family to reconnect before the busy Christmas season. She wore a simple but elegant dress in deep blue, her hair styled softly, and though she still looked more fragile than before her illness, there was color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. William stayed close to her throughout the evening, protective and attentive in the way he had been since her diagnosis. The dinner began pleasantly enough. Charles was in good spirits, genuinely delighted to have Catherine looking well again, asking about the children and their plans for Christmas. The conversation flowed easily through the first courses, touching on safe topics like upcoming royal engagements and plans for the new year. Catherine felt herself relaxing, felt some of the tension she always carried around Camilla beginning to ease. But then, as dessert was being served, Camilla made a comment that seemed innocuous on the surface, but carried that familiar edge that Catherine had come to recognize. She mentioned how busy the calendar would be in the coming months, how many engagements and appearances would be mandated, and then she turned to Catherine with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. She said it was such a relief that Catherine was feeling better, that everyone had been so worried when she had to step back from her duties, though of course some people managed to carry on even through illness, without making quite so much fuss about it. The Queen Consort mentioned how she herself had continued working through various health challenges over the years, how she believed that duty mandated sacrifice and that one simply had to push through discomfort for the sake of the crown. The implication was clear and cruel. Catherine had been weak, had made too much of her cancer diagnosis, had let down the family by stepping away from her responsibilities. The words hung in the air like poison, and for a moment, everyone at the table seemed frozen, unsure how to respond to something so inappropriate, yet delivered with such casual smile. Catherine felt something inside her crack. After years of enduring Camilla's subtle cruelties, after suffering in silence through countless small humiliations, after fighting cancer while dealing with Camilla's dismissiveness, this was too much. She had sacrificed her dignity, her peace of mind, her sense of belonging, all in service of maintaining family harmony. But to have her serious illness minimized, to have her cancer treatment characterized as making a fuss, was a bridge too far. But before Catherine could respond, before she could even decide whether to respond, one of the staff members present, a woman who had served the family for over 20 years, stood up from her seat. Her face was pale but determined, and her hand shook slightly as she addressed the Queen Consort directly. She said with a voice that trembled but did not break that she could no longer remain silent. She said that what Camilla had just said was unconscionable, was cruel beyond measure, and that it was representative of a pattern of behavior toward the Princess of Wales that had gone on far too long. She said that she had witnessed years of subtle bullying, of calculated undermining, of psychological cruelty disguised as concern or advice. The room erupted into chaos. Camilla's face went from shock to fury in an instant. She demanded to know how a staff member dared to speak to her in such a manner, accused the woman of gross insubordination and disloyalty. Charles, bewildered and confused, tried to restore order, asking what was happening, what was meant by these accusations. William's face had gone dark with anger, as the implications of what was being said began to sink in. But the staff member, knowing that she had already crossed a line from which there was no return, continued. She detailed specific incidents, dates, and conversations. She described the garden party comment about Catherine's informality, the bathroom incident when Catherine had broken down in tears, the dismissive remarks about her pregnancy illnesses, the constant comparisons to Diana, the deliberate exclusions and manipulations. She spoke of how Catherine had endured it all in silence, had never complained, had never sought to create family discord, but that someone wanted to speak the truth. Catherine sat frozen, her face white, as her private suffering was laid bare before the family. She had never wanted this, had never wanted her pain to become a spectacle or a cause of family division. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the protective shell she had built around herself over the years had been cracked open for everyone to see the wounds beneath. Camilla denied everything, her voice rising in indignation. She claimed that the staff member was delusional, that these were fantasies or misunderstandings, that she had always been nothing but supportive of Catherine. She turned to Charles, demanding that he dismiss this person immediately, that he put an end to these outrageous accusations. Her performance was convincing, full of hurt and betrayal, the wounded party being attacked by subordinates and ungrateful family members. But William had heard enough. He stood and addressed his stepmother with a coldness that shocked everyone present. He said that he had sensed for years that something was wrong, that Catherine had been unhappy in ways she would not explain, and now he understood why. He said that, if even half of what was being alleged was true, it represented a betrayal of his wife and his family that he could not overlook or forgive. Charles, caught between his wife and his son, demanded proof, demanded evidence beyond the word of a single staff member who might have her own grievances or motivations. He said that these were serious allegations and could not be accepted without proper substantiation. His voice carried the weight of a king accustomed to being obeyed, but also the confusion of a husband being told terrible things about the woman he loved. The staff member, anticipating this response, revealed that she had been keeping detailed notes for years, documenting dates, times, witnesses, and specific quotes. She had never intended to use them, had hoped that Camilla's behavior might improve, that Catherine's silent suffering might eventually end on its own. But after witnessing Catherine's battle with cancer and Camilla's callous response to it, she had decided to write the letter that Charles had received earlier that day. And she had kept copies of everything, had shared the information with other long-serving staff members who could corroborate her account. As if on cue, 2 other staff members who had been serving the dinner stepped forward. They confirmed that they too had witnessed Camilla's pattern of cruelty toward Catherine. They spoke of incidents they had seen, conversations they had overheard, moments when Camilla's mask had slipped and her true feelings toward the Princess of Wales had shown through. Their testimony was calm, specific, and devastating in its detail. Camilla's denials grew more frantic, more desperate. She accused the staff of conspiracy, of coordinating to bring her down, of being loyal to Catherine rather than to the crown. She suggested that Catherine had manipulated them, had played the victim to gain sympathy and support, but her accusations rang hollow in the face of such consistent and detailed testimony from people who had no apparent motive to lie. Catherine finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. She said that she had never asked anyone to defend her, had never sought to create this confrontation, had only ever tried to keep the peace and do her duty. She spoke without anger, without accusation, simply stating facts as if reciting a list of royal engagements. She mentioned specific incidents, her voice never rising, her composure never breaking. She said that she had endured it because she loved William, because she believed in the monarchy, because she thought that her personal suffering was less important than the stability of the institution. But she also said that she could not and would not pretend anymore that everything was fine, that the family was harmonious, that Camilla had been anything other than hostile toward her from the very beginning. The breaking point had been reached, the truth had been spoken, and there was no going back. Charles faces the truth. King Charles III sat alone in his study long after the disastrous dinner had ended, the weight of revelation pressing down on him like never before. He was a man who had waited decades to marry the woman he loved, who had endured public scandal and family disapproval to finally make Camilla his wife and queen consort. And now he was being forced to confront the possibility that the woman he thought he knew had been living a double life, showing him one face while presenting another to his daughter-in-law. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 separate staff members, all with decades of loyal service, all telling the same story with specific details that matched too perfectly to be fabrication. Catherine's quiet confirmation, delivered without drama or exaggeration, had carried the ring of truth that he could not deny. And William's face, the barely contained fury in his son's eyes, spoke of years of watching his wife suffer and not understanding why. Charles poured himself a whiskey, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to process what he had learned. He thought back over the years, searching his memory for signs he had missed, for moments when he should have seen what was happening. He remembered times when Catherine had seemed withdrawn at family gatherings, occasions when she had made excuses to leave early or skip events altogether. He had attributed it to the pressures of motherhood, to the demands of royal duty, never imagining that his own wife might be the cause of her discomfort. He remembered now how Camilla would speak about Catherine when they were alone. Small comments that had seemed like legitimate concerns at the time but took on darker meaning in light of tonight's revelations. Suggestions that Catherine was too focused on her public image, too concerned with being popular rather than dutiful. Observations that she seemed to struggle with royal protocol, that she perhaps was not quite prepared for the role she had married into. Charles had accepted these assessments at face value, had even found himself viewing Catherine through that lens at times. The realization that he had been manipulated, that his perceptions had been poisoned against someone who deserved his support and protection, filled him with shame. Catherine had been fighting cancer, had been suffering through treatment while Camilla whispered that she was exaggerating her condition for attention. The cruelty of it was staggering, and the fact that he had not seen it, had not protected his daughter-in-law, made him question his own judgment in ways that shook him to his core. When Camilla entered the study an hour later, her face was composed, but her eyes were wary. She began to speak, to offer explanations and justifications, but Charles raised his hand to stop her. He asked her directly, without preamble, if the allegations were true. Had she been cruel to Catherine? Had she deliberately undermined her, excluded her, made her feel unwelcome in the family? Camilla's response was careful, calculated. She admitted that perhaps she had been less warm than she might have been, that the adjustment to having Catherine in the family had been difficult. She framed it as a clash of personalities, a generation gap, differences in understanding what royal duty mandated. She suggested that Catherine had been oversensitive, that small comments had been misinterpreted, that staff members had blown normal family dynamics out of proportion. But Charles was not satisfied with these half-truths and evasions. He pressed harder, asking about specific incidents, demanding real answers. Why had she dismissed Catherine's cancer as making a fuss? Why had she constantly compared her to Diana? Why had she worked to exclude her from family events and undermine her confidence? Camilla's composure finally cracked. She admitted that Catherine had always been difficult for her to accept, that watching this young, beautiful, universally beloved woman join the family had stirred feelings of jealousy and inadequacy. She confessed that the public's adoration of Catherine felt like a constant reminder of her own controversial path to the throne, that every smile Catherine received felt like a judgment against her. Charles sat in stunned silence as his wife revealed the depth of her insecurity and the extent of her cruelty. He realized that the woman he had loved for so many years had been capable of sustained psychological warfare against someone who had done nothing to deserve it. The betrayal cut deeper than he could have imagined. The royal family divided. News of the confrontation spread through the palace by morning, carried by staff whispers and the careful observations of those who noticed the sudden chill in family relations. By December 16th, every member of the extended royal family knew that something significant had happened, though the full details remained closely guarded. The unity that the monarchy depended upon, the carefully maintained image of family harmony, had been shattered in a single evening. William and Catherine had left Windsor immediately after the dinner, returning to their home with the children. William was furious in a way those close to him had rarely seen, his protective instincts fully engaged, now that he understood the years of suffering his wife had endured. He demanded that his father take action, that Camilla be held accountable for her behavior, that Catherine receive the apology and acknowledgement she deserved. But the situation was far more complicated than simple justice. Camilla was the queen consort, crowned and anointed just the year before in May of 2023. Any public acknowledgement of her cruelty toward Catherine would create a scandal that could damage the monarchy itself. The press would have a field day, the public would take sides, and the institution that Charles had spent his life preparing to lead would be thrown into crisis. Charles found himself caught between impossible choices. His love for Camilla, deep and enduring despite this betrayal, pulled him toward finding some way to forgive and move forward. His duty to his son, his affection for Catherine, and his own sense of what was right demanded that he acknowledge the harm that had been done and ensure it never happened again. And his responsibility to the crown mandated that he consider the larger implications of whatever decision he made. Princess Anne, when informed of the situation, was characteristically direct. She told Charles that Camilla's behavior was inexcusable and that Catherine deserved better. She pointed out that the monarchy's survival depended on public support and that Catherine was far more beloved by the British people than Camilla had ever been. Any perception that the family had allowed Catherine to be mistreated, especially during her cancer battle, would be devastating to the institution's reputation. The staff members who had spoken out found themselves in limbo, uncertain of their futures. They had risked everything to tell the truth, knowing that their careers might be over regardless of the outcome. But they also found unexpected support from other long-serving palace employees who quietly thanked them for their courage, who shared their own observations of Camilla's treatment of Catherine over the years. Within days, the family was clearly divided into camps. William and Catherine had the support of most of the younger royals, who had witnessed the warmth and dedication Catherine brought to her role. Camilla retained the loyalty of some of Charles's cousins and their spouses, people she had cultivated relationships with over the years. Charles stood in the middle, trying to hold together a family that was coming apart at the seams. As Christmas approached, the question of how the family would handle the traditional celebrations at Sandringham loomed large. The public expected to see the royals together, united and happy, walking to church on Christmas morning, but the private reality was far different, with relationships strained to breaking point and fundamental questions about trust and loyalty still unresolved. Charles knew that decisions had to be made, that the current situation could not continue indefinitely. The monarchy wanted to present a united front, wanted to demonstrate stability and continuity. But he also knew that any solution that did not acknowledge the harm done to Catherine would be fundamentally unjust and ultimately unsustainable. The future hung in the balance, and the world watched, unaware of the crisis unfolding behind palace walls.